Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Martin. I'm here in my study in Norman, Oklahoma, and I welcome you to this webcast on post-secondary education skill assessments. It's an interesting topic because students with IEPs who wish to go on into post-secondary education, there are numerous academic assessments for those students. But what about the skills? Not everything is always related to academics. There's a variety of other skills that are important for admission into post-secondary education, as well as success once you're in there. And so we're going to look at two really different types of assessments today. One, to help prepare students for an academic 2 or 4 year program, and we'll look at a variation of that one. And then we're going to look at a very different type of an assessment. This is an assessment looking at the skills that the post-secondary experience programs look at when they are considering admission for a person into a post-secondary education experience-only program. So anyway, a little bit about me. My name is Jim Martin. As I already said, I'm a professor emeritus from the University of Oklahoma. That basically means I'm a retired guy, and I've been retired now for a couple of years. Before that, I was the director of the University of Oklahoma's Zero Center. I held the Zero Center Endowed Chair and was a professor in the educational psychology department. My entire career, I've spent examining, thinking about, teaching about, learning about secondary transition education and what we can do better to improve the likelihood of students with IEPs can successfully move through school and into a meaningful life once they leave school. So with all that said, I need to tell you that I am from Illinois. I actually grew up in Illinois, worked in Illinois. And then when I wanted to know more about what I was doing, I decided to go obtain my doctoral degree in special education from the University of Illinois. So it's great to be here as an University of Illinois alumni. I guess it's actually an alumnus, a University of Illinois alumnus. So with all of that said, let me click a couple buttons and to begin this show today, make sure to get them all, the correct ones all punched and punched again. And so here we go. To begin with today, we need to thank the Illinois Center for Transition and Work. This organization is sponsoring this webcast, and the center is doing some remarkable work on transition education practices in Illinois, and I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about them in years to come. The title of this assessment is Post-Secondary Education Skills Assessment, and I'm Jim Martin. Today we're going to look at the purpose of special education with the focus on post-secondary ed, followed by just a real brief understanding of what transition assessment happens to be, the fundamental aspects of transition assessment. We'll look at a college readiness assessment. This is for students and families who are believing that their students want to or could go on to a 2 or 4 year academic type college. Then we'll look at a different type of assessment. And this one is an assessment for supported education experience. And both of these assessments will tell educators, will give educators information about what they need to teach students to prepare them for their desired post-secondary education outcome. And then we'll summarize some of the important points of what we talked about. So, having said all that, let's get started. Purpose of special education. As defined in the very first paragraph of IDEA 2004, the purpose of special education is a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education designed to meet students' unique needs and this is the important part in relation to transition, and prepares them for further education, employment, and independent living. One thing that IDEA 2004 made very clear is that we as special educators also need to prepare students for further education, whether it be informal or formal post-secondary education. They need to be prepared for that in a way that matches what their post-secondary goals happen to be. There are a few transition assessment fundamentals we need to keep in mind. And number one, our IEPs for secondary age, for transition aged students with disabilities or students with IEPs must include post-secondary and annual transition goals. They need to be based upon appropriate transition assessments. The law says age-appropriate transition assessments, but I think it's also important to have an appropriate transition assessment. And these need to be related to further education, which is perfect for what we're going to talk about today, employment, and independent living when needed. Even students who are going off to school and may live at the school, we should look at what independent living skills students have now and what they need to learn before they go there. They might end up living in a dorm, for instance. So what skills can we provide them now? What can we teach them now to really be prepared for where they're going to live at in the future? Not meaning that we as special educators have to teach all of it. We just need to highlight what's important and focus on those skills that are really most important to the student's future. CEC's Division on Career Development and Transition firmly believes that transition assessment, it's an ongoing process of collecting data about students' needs, their interests, and how they relate to the future demands of where they're going to be at. And we need to take that information, put it into the IEP, and it will drive IEP goals and services. So the focus is on future roles as a worker and a citizen. Student choice is a major part of it. It's ongoing, it's future focused, and it's person-centered. And as much as possible, we need to get students engaged in the transition planning process. One of the interesting points we have learned over the last few years is that as students become more involved in their own transition planning process, guess what? It predicts better employment and improved post-secondary education success. And the result of transition assessment is a match between strengths and needs and interests and the demands of where they're going to be at in the future. The courts have weighed in on transition assessment too. Transition overall is a fairly new concept in education. Secondary transition is. And the requirement for transition assessment is even newer than transition itself. So it's a fairly recent addition. But having said that, there's been enough issues now that have come from the school-based, district-based due process hearings that either the school or the family still wanted to go into it more depth to appeal the decision. The next level is to go to federal district courts. And federal district courts have examined transition and transition assessment. And Prince and her colleagues examined these findings. And here's what they found out. Some of it matches exactly with what the law and what transition best practice says. But in a couple instances, they've also added to that slightly. So the courts have said we need to use multiple assessments, and we need to use these across transition domains. So 2 or more transition assessment, that's plural, and across transition domains. Further education is certainly one of those. And then at least one transition assessment in the student's transition battery needs to have adequate supporting validity and reliability data. The other assessments can all be informal assessments, meaning they have little to no supporting validity evidence. And we need to maximize student participation in the transition planning process as much as we can. And that means, at least in my interpretation of this, is that we also involve students in the transition assessment process, since that's all part of the transition planning process. So now let's jump in and look exactly at an example post-secondary education assessment. This is designed for students and families who are considering a 2 to 4 year program with academic admission requirements. We certainly don't need another academic assessment. We have ACT scores, we have SAT scores. Universities oftentimes look at GPAs. They want letters of recommendation. And the requirements actually vary upon the type of post-secondary program students are going to. But it's not just not academic skills that are important. It's the other things that either are required for admission into programs or skills that will assist students dramatically once they're in these programs. There's an assessment called Landmark Guide to Assessing College Readiness. It's an informal assessment, it has 25 items, it's free. It has no data to support its validity that I know of or could find when I've looked for it. Educators tell me it's great for students and families who are considering post-high school academic options. They've told me stories of where they've used it with to help educate parents over what some of the requirements are for post-secondary education as a way to help show what students still have to learn. And for students, it's not meant to encourage or discourage students from going into a 2 or 4 year academic program, but it's kind of to face the reality, face the music. If you want to go and be successful at these programs, here are some things that you need to learn. So the Landmark Guide to Assessing College Readiness has 5 domains. It looks briefly at academic skills in kind of a broad overview fashion. It looks at student self-understanding, student self-advocacy, executive functioning skills, and motivation and confidence. And you can go to this long web address, this long URL address to download the actual assessment, or just Google Landmark Guide to Assessing College Readiness. Either one of those will work. Now, as I said earlier, the results do not determine if a student should attend a 2 or 4 year academic program. It just provides parents and students something to think about, to ponder as they're making decisions about post-secondary goals. And it's a great way to gather strengths and needs to put into students' IEPs. So here it is, assessing college readiness. And Landmark College made this specifically for students with learning disabilities or ADHD. We found it to be effective for other students as well. And since an informal assessment, you can easily modify it to work with students who happen to have other disability classifications. Just turn it around a bit, or don't ask a couple of the questions that they ask in the assessment and replace them with something more relevant to the particular student that you're working with. So what it does, it's a very simple assessment. If yes, mark yes with a check mark. If it's not marked, then just leave it open. And then at the bottom of it, you count up the total number of checks. It's as simple as that. So let's look at some of the skills that they require. Academic skills. Can you read up to 200 pages in a week? Do you have a system for taking notes? Can you write a paper of 10 or more organized pages that refers to 2 or more sources? Do you have a system to prepare for tests and exams? And can you clearly summarize a college level reading assignment? As I said, it looks at broad overall academic skills, but these really do apply, especially in a 4-year academic-oriented university, and also in a 2-year program, an academic transfer to a 4-year program. And think about how students would respond to this. I really want to attend OU, but I have to read 200 pages in a week. Oh man, the most I've ever read is maybe 5 or 6. 200 pages? See, it gets students to think. And maybe they reflect upon this and either say, I can do this, I'm going to start doing it, I can practice, or make another decision. Maybe something else is better for me. Self-understanding, the section on metacognition. Can you define and describe your disability? Have you read your psychoeducational testing? Do you know your academic strengths? Do you know which academic tasks give you the most difficulty? And can you identify the academic support you need to be successful? Yes or no? What do you think of those? Self-advocacy. Do you know your legal rights? When you run into difficulty, who do you ask for help? Do you schedule your own appointments with doctors, advisors, and counselors? Do you have access to your psychoeducational testing? If a school or college refused to provide you with appropriate accommodation, how would you advocate for yourself? And would you advocate for yourself? Executive functioning. Do you have a system for keeping track of projects and papers? Do you have a system for scheduling and managing your time? Are you able to ignore difficulties and focus on what you have to do, your task at hand? Are you able to complete all the steps of a project in a timely manner? Get the idea? This last one. Do you have a strategy for completing tasks that you find boring? I really don't want to do this. It's boring. Well, if you want to, get a grade in this class, and sometimes you got to do things that are boring, can you still work your way through it or not? Now, to summarize these scores, scoring less than 3 in self-advocacy indicates that a student would benefit from instructions and laws and regulations. Because college students are adults, they cannot be compelled to use services for students with disabilities, and they cannot be compelled to use accommodations. So they have to advocate for themselves. So self-advocacy is something that is thought highly of. And so a student must independently ask for, and at times even fight for, services and support. And so college students must personally request any required accommodations. And even if they want disability services, they have to go directly to the disability service office and request it. Parents can't do that for them. It's something that students have to do. So there's no better time than when somebody's in high school to learn how to practice all of these skills. So scoring is easy. Transfer the total for each area into the matching spaces in the form, sum up all the questions marked yes, multiply the total number of answered marked yes by 4 to get the percent answer. And what they say is that scoring 80% or higher suggests a student is likely to succeed independently in a traditional college environment. Scoring below 50 suggests a student is likely to struggle. For these students, the kinds of strategies and skill building that can be done, in this case at Landmark College, or that can be done in high school to get them ready for an academic college program is something that we need to focus on. There's an educator-made variation of the Landmark assessment. It's 30 questions rather than 25. And they've added in another domain, and this one called postsecondary education. And you download it at this particular link, comes as a PDF. And here are the 5 postsecondary education questions that have been added in. I see many benefits in going to college. I want to go to college as much as my parents want me to go. I do not feel pushed into going to college. The thought of college doesn't really scare me, and I am ready to be in thinking about my future and planning for college. So this addition helped make students really think about if they really want post-secondary education or not. Or is it something that what they might say, the students might say is, you know, my parents really want me to go to college. So here, once again, we add up the total of yeses, multiply it by 3.33 to get your overall percent score. So what do you think? Would you find this assessment useful for students who are considering an academic program and for parents who are really thinking that they would like their students to go to a typical academic program? This is a good assessment to begin with. There's a new one that came out just recently, just within the last year. And to match the new type of program that's available for students who cannot go the typical academic route admission to college. And the field is changing so much. I don't quite know the exact wording to use for this type of a program. There's a website called Think College that explains this education experience better than what I'm about to do. And I refer you to just Google Think College and you'll get this type of program. But there's a new assessment design to help teach students the skills and provide them the opportunities while they're still in high school to meet the admission requirements to make it into a supported post-secondary education experience program. So let's look at this one. It's called the Post-Secondary Education and Experience Assessment. Andrea Sook is a former student of mine, and she's developed this assessment. And you can go to this website to download it. It's free. You don't download it, you complete it online. It's an online assessment. I'll just leave this up here for a couple seconds so you can scribble it down if you want to. It's a very useful tool and one that is picking up a lot of interest among secondary transition people who see the Think College type programs as a great option for post-secondary life for students, as a way to help them prepare for a working world, but with a stop in between in a post-secondary education setting. So let's look at this assessment. It was created to evaluate the skills and attributes of students considering an alternative post-secondary education program. These are students who won't qualify for college through the typical admission process. Oftentimes, there are students in school who had alternative curriculum standards. It includes students with more significant support needs as well, typically intellectual disability, autism, traumatic brain injury, and so on. The creation of this assessment came from examining the admission packets that students and families and educators have to fill out from over 200 Think College type programs on college and university campuses across the country. So Andrea Sook, who's the author of this assessment, got the applications and she went through and identified all the different behaviors and experiences that they look for. She took these and organized an initial draft of what all these items were and kind of clustered them in like-minded categories. And then she sent them to the program directors who reviewed them, provided feedback. Andrea revised the assessment based on the feedback from the program directors of these post-secondary experience programs. And then she revised the assessment again and sent it back to them for review and made final changes. So it's a new emerging assessment. So it has some validity data, but not enough data yet, supporting data for it to be considered a formal assessment that has ample supporting validity evidence. So this is your informal assessment that you can include in the transition assessment battery. Did I mention it's free? It's a no-cost assessment. It's socially valid because it came from the exact admission application forms that programs use and that program directors verified as being important. It's designed to be completed by an IEP team member or two. It's fully online. It's automatically scored, and an email will send the results to whoever is completing it. It consists of 71 questions directly linked to the skills and attributes identified as important in the admission process across the country. So here are the construct areas or the assessment areas: application skills, general programming, parent responsibilities and expectation, navigation and safety, academic skills, independent living, technology skills, a section on self-determination, one on independence and motivation, health and wellness, behavior expectations, and of course, interpersonal skills. We're going to go through and I'll show you some screenshots of the actual assessment so you can get a better idea of what each of these construct areas look like. So let's go look at a few of them. But to begin with, we have some overall questions. The potential student discusses enrolling for services at the campus disability service office. Never, rarely, sometimes, most of the time, always. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's basically a 0 to 4 or 1 to 5 scale. It's either they don't do it or they can do it and do it well. The parent guardian will commit to participate in activities, interviews, and sign any required forms. Finding out if the parents are going to be involved and support this. One of the keys, it looks like, that's emerging from post-secondary education programs is the important role of parental involvement in these programs. With respect to family and cultural expectations, the family is supported of the student becoming more independent and self-determined. The potential student has expressed interest in pursuing higher education experience and is motivated to achieve this goal. The potential student will benefit from the program and has the potential to achieve these goals. The student wants to be competitively employed at the end of the program. The student has a desire to participate in college experiences to develop employment skills. So there's questions. They're all automatically tabulated when it's finished, emailed to the educator. And here are some of the points that are included in the email. I just copied and pasted some from the email. It says, thank you for completing this assessment. Below are your results. Consider all, most of the time, and always responses as strengths. Consider all the never and rarely responses as needs and potential student goal areas. And any unknown responses need to be addressed to determine if the student has the skill or if a goal needs to be created. The potential, so we have each item again with the student response listed below. And so there's not an overall summary score. You'll have to go through and tally up the number of yeses if you want to kind of get a percent out of it yourself. That's a weakness of the assessment. I wish it did give us an overall score of some type, but it doesn't. But you could do your own fairly easily, I think, by looking at the most of the time or yeses and just determine your own percentage score. So there's not many post-secondary education assessments for students with disabilities that are focused for the most part not on academic skills. But I believe these two and the variation of one of them will give you as an educator, it provides educators an excellent means to learn the skills that students can still be taught and experiences to have why they are still in high school. These are designed to be used in middle school or first year of high school when the student and family start thinking about post-secondary options. And remember that we pull the strengths and needs from these assessments to include in the student IEPs. And from these needs, we then come up with identified annual transition goals. I hope you found this particular assessment useful. And they're two very unique assessments, and one that high school teachers I've found really do find them useful for helping their students to prepare for transition into either a 2 or 4 year college, or now that we have this new assessment, into post-secondary experience-only programs. Well, my name is Jim Martin, and thank you for spending a little time with me learning about these assessments. From my office here in Norman, Oklahoma, bye-bye.